What if everything you believe about your personality is just an elaborate story you've been telling yourself? And you know where these stories come from, right? That voice in your head. You know the one. It's got you totally convinced about who you are. I'm just not good with money. I'll always be anxious. This is just my personality. And I get it. I used to be the queen of this is just who I am. For over a decade, I was that wild party girl posting drunk updates on Facebook and making sure everyone knew I'd never change. I wore that identity like a badge of honor. Hell, I even fought to keep it. Every time my mom questioned my interesting social media choices, I'd just post something more outrageous. Real mature, right? But here's the thing about personalities. They are not set in stone. They're more like stories we tell ourselves over and over again until we believe them. And trust me, our brains are really good at finding evidence to support whatever story we're telling. Think about it. Every time you react to something, your brain is basically taking notes. Oh, this is how we handle stress. Got it. Filing that away for next time. And before you know it, you've got these deep grooves in your brain, like a record that keeps playing the same song because that's just where the needle naturally falls. Well, here's where it gets good though. Science is showing us something pretty interesting. These grooves in your brain are not permanent. Every single experience you have is literally rewiring your brain, creating new pathways, new possibilities. And I know what you're thinking, but I've been this way forever. Yeah, I thought that too. But forever is a funny thing when you realize it's just yesterday's choices repeated so many times they feel permanent. The truth is, those personality traits that you're convinced are hardwired into your DNA might actually just be really strong habits. Your anxiety, your perfectionism, that people-pleasing thing that you do, they're not life sentences, they're patterns, and patterns can change. So this isn't just some fluffy, think positive bullshit. It's neuroscience. This is your brain's natural ability to change and adapt. But most of us are walking around with an instruction manual for ourselves that's way past its expiration date. So today, our guest is Olga Khazan, staff writer at The Atlantic and author of Me, But Better. She's done the research, run the experiments, and found out what it really takes to change who you are, not just on the surface, but at your core. So in this episode, you will learn why you keep falling back into old patterns and the weird brain science behind breaking free, the real reason most people fail when trying to change themselves, and how to tell if your personality traits are helping you grow or just keeping you safe and stuck. Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up or text the word morning to 33777.
I was sort of like, I'm an introvert. And so people would be like, hey, do you want to come to happy hour? And I'd be like, oh, no, I'm an introvert. Like, I don't like things like that. And a big part of this was just realizing that, like, if you experiment with unsticking those labels, right? Like, you can stick it back on if you want. But if you just think to yourself, like, okay, what if I wasn't an introvert? What if I was an extrovert for one night? And they've actually done studies on this. They told introverts, go socialize with someone for a few minutes. First of all, they had fun. They felt better afterwards. And the second and weirder thing that happened is that they said they felt more like themselves when they were socializing. So it kind of tells you that sometimes these labels that you stick to yourself are not totally accurate. And maybe you should experiment with what happens when you peel them off.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
So what made you decide that understanding personality change would become part of your life story?
Yeah, so I kind of noticed a pattern with myself where I often would have a perfectly good or fine day, and maybe even some kind of really great things would happen. The intro of the book kind of describes one such day, but I kind of always found the negative in it, and I always found the negative in a lot of different situations. Like a lot of my thought processes um, were very negative and kind of threat oriented. And that, of course, correlates with the personality trait of neuroticism, which is kind of like depression and anxiety. And I also kind of noticed that I was quite isolated, and not just because of COVID, but I just kind of didn't socialize much or get out much or really even do things that I like enjoyed. So I kind of wanted to disrupt my life a little, and personality seemed like the way to do it.
Tell us about that story because your book opened with this really interesting photo shoot meltdown that became your
Yes.
catalyst for change. And I know my audience loves stories.
Okay, so I'm in Miami. Okay, so first of all, I have to preface this by saying that the story is not going to sound that bad, and that is the point. Like I realize that it is a very privileged thing that happened to me, but that is sort of the point of why this sort of instigated the whole thing. So I'm in Miami. It's December, perfect time to be in Miami, like sunny every day, everything you could imagine, like beautiful ocean, everything. And my job calls me and they're like, we have to take photos of you to go in the magazine, right? And this is where it's like, I realize that that is a good thing. I especially realize now. So I'm like kind of freaking out. I don't like having my photo taken. And I also have to get a haircut before this photo shoot because my hair at the time, it was COVID again, and it was just kind of all unruly and like weird looking. So I book a haircut, get to the haircut. The haircut is awful. She just cuts it into this really weird style that I didn't ask for. It's like it doesn't really work with my hair. She at one point stops in the middle of the haircut to answer the phone, like and have a phone conversation, and then is like, "Where were we?" Like, and so my hair looks awful. I like get lost on the way to the photo studio, so I'm like late getting there. He wants to take a bunch of photos of me in profile, which I don't like the way I look in profile. Like I know a lot of women don't. So I get that this is something I should just get over, but I don't like it. He takes a bunch of photos of me in profile, shows them to me, and is like, "What do you think?" And I'm like, "I don't like them." Then I have to drive on to go to the grocery store. Why didn't I do Instacart? I don't know. I had to get groceries because my mom was flying in that night and she's on a special diet and I needed the stuff that works for her diet. So I like go to the grocery store, like in my photo shoot clothes. I like shop, get all the stuff. Then I'm rolling the cart to my car in this like very hot Miami parking lot, and the cart locks because I am outside the perimeter of like where the cart operates. And I have to drag the cart full of groceries to my car across, once again, a very hot Miami parking lot in my photo shoot clothes. And I load all the stuff in the trunk and drive home, more traffic, more whatever. Like my boss is like slacking me stuff this entire time. I feel like I'm gonna get fired because this is all taking so long. And I just break down. Yeah, I get back to the Airbnb and I'm like, my life is nothing but stress and torture. I hate everyone and everything. I'm so unhappy. We're not having kids. Like I'm like yelling just aloud to my boyfriend at the time. And I was, and then like basically instantaneously, as I'm sure many listeners are currently doing, I was like, wait, you are so spoiled. This was not that bad. Everything worked out fine. And there's something going on here that's deeper than just like a bad haircut.
In your defense, that sounds like a horrible day. But I'm so relatable because I think we can all see ourselves in that story just with different details. I just went on a retreat that I was speaking at. And this retreat was like 75 people. It wasn't like an intimate one. And I was in the middle of the jungle. And I was so excited to be there. And also, I got there and realized the weather was different than I thought it was. The accommodations were a little bit more eco than I thought. So you'd like definitely sacrifice stuff. Like the shower is the bathroom. So actually, if you shower at any time, the whole floor's wet of everywhere that you're going to step. Like all these little things, right? And so I'm sitting there and I'm just like, maybe this is meant for younger people. And and I go on this whole train of thought about how, like, I don't know, should I go get a hotel somewhere else, blah, blah, blah. And then I had one of those reverse moments where I'm like, first of all, why is it that my age, like, yeah, I have more preferences the older I get, where I used to just like fall asleep on somebody's floor before. What would happen if I let go of these expectations and just lived in the moment and just accepted it like this was a fun thing? Like, what if I convinced myself this was fun and this is what I chose? And so I decided to do that. And it ended up being one of my favorite life experiences of all time.
Oh, wow, that's great.
And part of it, I do think that it is age, but also I've been dealing with those things. That situation was age. Like, okay, I'm used to different things in my life now. I wasn't used to them before, but that's not the only place that our negative tendencies come from. So when you were unraveling yours, what did you link that neuroticism back to?
Yeah, so part of it for me is like incontrovertibly genetic. Like both my parents have a pretty high degree of depression and anxiety. But a lot of it is not genetic. Like a lot of it, so only like 40 to 60% of your personality can be explained by genetics. The rest of it is kind of stuff that you do and like stuff that you experience and stuff that you decide. And I kind of noticed that I just get into anxious kind of grooves where I decide that my anxiety is sort of like my secret weapon. And I will kind of be like, yay, anxiety is good. And I'll kind of like attach anxiety to different situations, attach a lot of self-criticism to different situations where it kind of doesn't belong. And I was just doing that with a lot of things. Like the floor thing that you said, I found very relatable because I too would be like, the floor, like it's wet. And then I would be like, why did I come here? I shouldn't have come here. I am too old for, like a similar kinds of thoughts. I mean, you obviously had the presence of mind to like be like, wait, snap out of it. But it's a hard thing to do.
After 3 hours in wet slippers, okay?
yeah. I mean, it's uncomfortable, right? So it was kind of like I was like, okay, part of this, like I'm working against I'm swimming upstream here with my genetics, but also this is a mindset that I have.
Yeah. It's funny that we relate it back to our parents because it's hard to say with my dad now because I lost my dad when I was 19. And so now, like the last 20 years, I have a lot of thoughts of, I feel like maybe he'd be the only one that really understood me, but maybe that's also just wishful thinking and idealizing. But my mom has quite a bit of neuroticism, but it was funny because I've linked some of mine back to her. I've also sort of prided myself in being different, but I can see it coming through more as I age. But a couple years back, we were somewhere and I could feel myself being the little things sort of adding up for me. I was trying not to say them, but I was getting really close. And then I was sitting next to my mom and I thought it might be about to be a time where like, maybe this will be something that we can bond on or something like, a negativity spiral. And then she said something, the exact opposite of what I expected. She basically said something about going with the flow and how nice it is. And it was just so unexpected for me that it jolted me out of it. And I think back to that almost every time I'm going to a negativity spiral. And I was like, this thing that I thought I got from her, I actually kind of learned how to get out of it from her.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. Our parents, they give us good and bad things, right? Like they have strengths and weaknesses.
And it's just a testament to how often, like when we have a lens of something, like here's the belief, now here's what I'm looking at in my life, it's tainted. And so whether we're in our own negativity spiral or how we view ourselves or how we view our neuroticism or anxiety or whatever, we're still looking at everything through a lens that might not even be the lens of anxiety itself, but the lens of I have anxiety, which might be a little too meta for some people, but it's like, this is me, this is who I am. And then we're just drilling in that personality even more.
Exactly. Yeah. And one thing, so like one thing I did for my neuroticism is I took an intensive meditation class. And people keep asking me like, what's the most profound thing that I learned? And it's going to sound so simple, but honestly, it was the meditation teacher. She would always say things happen that we don't like. And for some reason, that was very mind blowing to me, even though obviously things happen that we don't like. That's like the most basic thing ever. But I had sort of been carrying around this belief that I am responsible for making everything go perfectly. And I noticed that it was when things would stop going perfectly that I would get really frustrated with myself and also the world and kind of like the decisions that led me to that point. And so a big part of it was, like you said, just letting go of that lens that like things are supposed to go perfectly, because actually things like don't tend to go perfectly, and like not for anyone, and not even anyone who like makes all the right decisions. So there's no need to like cling to that belief.
I need to share something that just changed the way I run my own business. You know that moment when you're drowning in work and realize that you needed help on your team like yesterday? Been there, which is exactly why I started using Indeed. Look, I'm going to give it to you straight because I wish someone had told me this sooner. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. I used to waste so much time posting jobs everywhere, hoping the right person would somehow find me. But Indeed's sponsored jobs changed everything. Your post goes right to the top where the best candidates are actually looking. And sponsored jobs on Indeed get 45% more applications than regular posts. But here's the part that matters. They're actually qualified people. No more sorting through hundreds of random resumes. And the best part? You're not locked into anything. No monthly fees, no contracts. You just pay when it works. It's kind of wild, actually. In the time we've been talking, 23 people just got hired through Indeed. That's their real data, not just marketing fluff. There's no need to wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/mindlove. Just go to Indeed.com/mindlove right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/mindlove. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. There's so much confusing information out there about nutrition and gut health. I can't tell you how many experts I've interviewed who completely contradict each other, and I don't air the interview. And don't even get me started on those social media health experts who are secretly getting paid by big food companies to promote ultra-processed foods. That's exactly why I got excited about Zoe, a science-backed nutrition company that's getting really specific about your body. They've built the world's largest microbiome database and created the most scientifically advanced at-home gut test. So when they analyze your results, they can see patterns and make connections that other companies just don't have the data to find. And this isn't just another trendy wellness thing. Their results are backed by randomized controlled trials. Participants were 4 times more likely to report better sleep and more energy. Because when your gut's happy, everything just works better. I love that they're cutting through all the noise with real science. No more guessing about what foods work for your body. Go to Zoe.com and find out what Zoe membership could do for you. And because you listen to Mind Love, you can use the exclusive code MINDLOVE10 to get 10% off your membership. As a Zoe member, you'll get an at-home test kit and personalized nutrition program to help you make smarter food choices that support your gut. That's ZOE.com. Use code MINDLOVE10 at checkout. Trust your gut. Trust Zoe. And how freeing is it when you switch the mantra, the hidden mantra in your mind, to I make everything go perfectly, to I handle whatever comes my way.
Exactly.
You have a different thing to lean into. That reminds me, you have this sort of fascinating tension in your book between accepting yourself and wanting to change. How do you navigate that balance?
So I very explicitly for me personally, I had 2 personality traits that I did not want to change on. So I was very high in openness to experiences, which is a personality trait that's sort of like imaginativeness, creativity, sort of verbal fluency. And that I was already very high on. I didn't want to get lower, basically. And also conscientiousness, which is like getting things done, being on time, being really organized. So for me, for those parts of the book, I interviewed other people and kind of learned tips on how to change those traits through the stories of others. So for me, it was very much like I accept like those are good parts of myself, and I'm happy with those. The stuff I was more working on was really neuroticism, extroversion, and agreeableness. And even with agreeableness, I would say like my score did not go up that much, even after all the work that I did trying to become more agreeable, because it's just like very hard to change your level of agreeableness. Like if you just think about it, like you probably don't know too many people who are like total grumps and became these like, saints, like who were just like so friendly all the time. But even there, like I was kind of like, maybe this is okay. Like maybe it's okay to be really critical, in times, things that concern my child, things that, are of importance, and maybe a situation where me or someone I love is getting taken advantage of or something like that. Maybe it's good to not be like, totally Mr. Rogers in that situation, but in other ways, find opportunities to give people the benefit of the doubt, or just to be more compassionate toward, other people. So it's sort of like there's this concept called free traits, and it's confusing because there's also personality traits. But anyway, free trait theory just means that you can kind of switch between elements of the personality traits depending on the situation. So it's sort of like if you're in a certain situation, like it doesn't mean, if it's time to buckle down and study hard for an exam, that doesn't mean you need to be extroverted right at that moment. Maybe that's a time for introversion. A lot of people do this without even realizing it. And part of the success of this kind of project is in knowing when to do that.
Those free traits make a lot of sense. I feel like people don't talk about that enough. And that's something that's always sort of been confusing for me in different personality tests, where I'm like, I heavily identify with this, but I'm actually also seeing that I do the exact opposite, like 50% of the time. What is that? So it's probably nice to know that, I don't know. I think we all just like learning about ourselves. So now I'm like, tell me about my free traits online exam.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So you mentioned William James' set like plaster theory about personality being fixed by 30, but you say that research now disapproves. And I've heard people mention that before. So what have you learned, or what surprised you the most about the malleability, I guess, of personality?
Yeah. So just to avoid like overstating what happens, like it's not like you become like this completely different person, right? Like you're going to be basically recognizable from the time you're, I don't know, in your early 20s to the time you're in your, I don't know, late 50s, right? There's actually, let's say mid 20s to late 50s. There's some stuff that happens in old age, and there's some stuff that happens like in adolescence and early 20s where you do change like really radically over a short period of time. But I mean, all the studies that have been done show that people do change over time, even if they don't try to change. They become less neurotic. They become less open to experiences in a lot of cases. These are just, most people change on at least one personality trait, from their young adulthood to their late adulthood. And that's often just because of the experiences that we're having. Like, if you think about it, you can't really be the same like party girl that you were in college once you have kids. Like, you're going to start investing a lot more in those kids and like a lot of emotional energy. You're going to have a totally different set of priorities. You're going to just have different things that you care about and that you think about. And that's going to change who you are. You're just, you might not be as extroverted for at least for that part of your life. So it really, but it kind of gives you hope, because like if you weren't crazy about the way you behaved at various points in your life, you're probably not going to be that way forever.
Perfect example. I was the biggest party girl for way too long, like 12 years, maybe even longer. It was definitely 18 through 30 though. And I remember actually thinking, I'm going to be this way forever. Like, I like set that in my mind where I'm just like, I'm not going to be the boring people. Like, this is way too fun. And I was going on like 11 years of it. So it seemed like I could keep going. And man, I don't even know. It was before I had kids that changed. It was about a year before COVID, where I started just being super turned off by all of my previous behaviors, making these rapid changes. Now, the amount that I identify with the memes online of like, 1 minute you're like snorting Coke off the back of a toilet seat, and then the next you're making sourdough bread and checking the ingredients of everything. Like, I relate to that so hardcore.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because your priorities changed or it got old or, and
Oh,
you probably, you stopped, being around the people who had those old priorities. And, a lot of our personality comes from who we socialize with and what we do every day. So yeah, it's a good thing. It's a good thing to change.
and I think a lot of that was pretty conscious because I started reading a lot. I started learning about what we're influenced by. I started figuring out what I wanted to do. And so when you say agreeable, that's one of those that I see has changed quite a bit because I was the go with the flow person. Like, what are we doing today? And then I remember actually creating my own ideas. I was like, well, what do I want to do with my life? What does that mean for tonight? Like, how do I want to spend my time? What kind of person do I want to be? And when I started figuring that out, I lost a lot of friendships because I was no longer the person that was just in for whatever they chose. But, and it was a difficult period for a while, but then I started getting just as deliberate about what I wanted to build. Even now, even recently, I was realizing I was missing a certain kind of conversation and female friendship. So I was like, I'm going to create an event at my house and we're going to come over. We're going to do the question cards. And it was really, really healing for a number of reasons. I realized I had more resources than I thought to create the change that I wanted. And also I realized how easy it was and certain things were right there in front of me. So I'm wondering for you, you had this realization, you wanted some changes. Where did you go from there?
Yeah, so I love that story and that you actually did that. So I know this sounds silly, but I didn't really realize that it was possible to do different things. Like to like do things differently. Like you kind of get stuck in a rut, right? Like you work and you make dinner and then you watch TV, like whatever, you go to bed. Like you don't really think like, why don't I do something different? So for me, this was like a forcing mechanism to do different things. And so the first thing I did really is to work on extroversion. So just to get out more. And I signed up for a bunch of activities. I signed up for improv comedy classes, a sailing club, and a bunch of like meetups with strangers where you like go hiking and stuff. So I started going out like almost every day or like socializing basically more days than not, which was very unusual for me. And that was sort of the biggest whoa moment because I realized that I liked talking to people more than I had maybe been giving myself credit for. Like I was definitely part of like the introvert revolution. And like, I was like, I'm an introvert. I need quiet time to myself to recharge. But you can kind of overdo it a little bit. Like you can kind of be like, I only need quiet time to myself to recharge. But then I kind of realized that I do like, I need stuff to look forward to and I need to have conversations with people that aren't just interviews that I do for my job. Not that those aren't great, but like I need to have like spontaneous conversations that are not just questions and answers. And I think that was a big kind of step for me because it was kind of letting go of my introversion a little bit and like kind of maybe admitting that maybe I am a little bit of an extrovert, or at least sometimes I am, and like, or that I needed to turn that dial in my life a lot more than I had been.
I'm really glad you brought that up because something I've talked about over the years is my relationship to labels. I think as humans, we like labels. We like understanding ourselves through a lens where it feels like somebody else has already figured it out. And then we learn some new things. And oftentimes those labels can be very helpful in the beginning. Examples for me, ADHD, empath. I still don't know if I'm an introvert or an extrovert. I'm like very extreme on both sides, just depending on the day. But uh, with each of those, it ended up becoming a crutch. And a crutch, by the very nature of the name, is something that's supposed to be temporary that you then let go of for a while. But instead, if I start identifying with it, it doesn't serve me, because then there's not as much of an openness to expanding out of it or to exploring the parts of you that don't necessarily fit within that tidy label.
Mm-hmm.
What do you feel about labels? Do you like them?
Yeah, so that's a great point. And so there's a label metaphor in the book where I talk about how I, for a long time, had kind of personality labels that I stuck to myself. Like a big one was I'm anxious. And part of that was like, I'm too anxious to do XYZ, right? And so, like if it was, so for a long time, it was about having a child. And I was like, I'm too anxious to have a child. I won't be able to handle it. I'm an anxious person, and anxious people don't have kids. Of course they do, but like whatever. That was my story that I was telling myself. And the same with introversion, actually. Like I was sort of like, I'm an introvert. And so people would be like, hey, do you want to come to happy hour? And I'd be like, oh, no. I'm an introvert. Like I don't like things like that. And a big part of this was just realizing that, like, if you experiment with unsticking those labels, right? Like you can stick it back on if you want. But if you just think to yourself, like, okay, what if I wasn't an introvert? What if I was an extrovert for one night, right? And they've actually done studies on this. They told introverts, go act like an extrovert, right? Like just go socialize with someone for a few minutes. The introverts, first of all, they had fun. They felt better afterwards. They had a boost in their mood. And the second and like weirder thing that happened is that they said they felt more like themselves when they were socializing, which these are introverts. Like, so it kind of tells you that like sometimes these labels that you stick to yourself are not totally accurate. And like maybe you should experiment with what happens when you peel them off.
Throughout the book, you explore different approaches to change, from MBSR to, like you said, sailing clubs. Which method challenged your preconceptions of personality change the most?
Meditation challenged my preconceptions the most, because I had thought that I was like, I want to meditate. I want to be more relaxed. I have time to do this. I am on book leave. Like there is no one more like suitable for meditation than I. And I like really didn't like it. I found it really challenging basically the whole time. I really found it hard to like sit with my thoughts and not do anything. Not doing anything for 45 minutes is really hard for me.
45 minutes, a long session.
Yeah, it was a lot of meditation. It was 45 minutes a day. I don't know, like for me, and that was so frustrating because I felt like with, stuff like sailing, like it's like, woohoo, we're on the water. Like we're having so much fun. Like this is fun. Extroversion's fun. I'm an extrovert now. And with meditation, it was so like, God, this is so hard. Like maybe I'm not doing this right. And maybe I'm just like too neurotic for this to work. And, this is like not a good use of my time. Like I kind of, all those like questions started to come up of like, maybe this doesn't really work. But then my neuroticism went down at the end of the meditation class. So.
Nice. I am actually the biggest proponent of meditation, but it took me probably 10 years of consistently trying before it started feeling really good. So I know it's hard for me. I'm like, I want to tell people, just stick with it like another 9.5 years.
Yeah.
It's a really hard thing. But I was just telling somebody yesterday, because she has a really hard time with meditation. And something I learned in transcendental meditation is that moment of, because we all have it multiple times in a meditation, usually, of like, I'm just going to get up. Or like all of a sudden, like I'll like turn to like check my phone, even though I have a blindfold on. And, and in that moment, if you just breathe through it and go back to the mantra, stress actually leaves your body physiologically. And so something about knowing that makes it easier for me to come back and like, oh, it's a discomfort blip. And then I just kind of picture it like elevating past my head, like floating up out of my awareness. But, now, if you stick with it for a while, my meditation now It's like a bliss space. It's like better than a dopamine hit. I'll get really excited about going to my meditation mat. In case you want a little bit of motivation to try to stick with it.
That's
but do
amazing.
something like transcendental meditation. For some reason, my practice really clicked into place when I went that route, and I had tried a bunch of different things, but
okay, that's interesting that transcendental worked for you. Yeah, I will say that it made me a lot more comfortable with negative emotions. Like I realized that a lot of what I was doing in life was being really scared of negative emotions and then being really uncomfortable when they happened, and like almost like the emotion would happen and it would freak me out more that like disappointment or sadness or stress was happening. Like that would itself be very stressful. So a lot of what meditation did for me, at least that class that I did, was like, I know it sounds so cheesy. There's no way to talk about this. Like welcoming those emotions a little bit, or just like at least like being like, okay, this emotion is happening. Like this is a normal emotion. Like we all feel emotions, you know? Yeah, I don't know. That's what I noticed it doing for me.
Yeah. And I think some of the misconceptions around what meditation is, what it's supposed to feel like, can really deter people from it, because I just talked to my grandma about this. She's like, I can't clear my thoughts. And I'm like, the point isn't actually get to a bliss space. You can get there. It usually takes quite a long time, but it's just the practice of letting go of every thought. All those thoughts are going to keep coming up. A brain is going to do what the brain does. It's going to keep thinking. And so the practice is actually not attaching to them, being like, oh, no, but I really want to think about this for an extra 3 minutes and plan my evening. Nope. Come back to the mantra. And then when you keep doing that, then in regular life, you're not as attached to all of the little things, because you're like, let's just go back to my breath and be here with my wet floor.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good way of and the mantra really helps make it clear what you're doing, because it gives you something to focus on that's not the thought. I think maybe one thing that was challenging about meditation for me was that we didn't do the transcendental kind, so we didn't have a mantra. It was just sort of like your breath or nothing. And that was a little more challenging for me.
Or then you go to transcendental meditation, you get your personalized mantra. And for some reason, like 90% of people hate their mantra. So then that's a whole new level.
Yeah.
You write about the maturity principle and how people naturally become less neurotic with age. And on one hand, I can see that in like senior citizen age. But on the other hand, I kind of feel like my trajectory has been like a little more neurotic. And then maybe it's starting to taper down now. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So it is unfortunately like senior citizen age that you start to see those declines in neuroticism, at least on a significant level. And like, women just have more neuroticism on average than men. And that sounds really bad every time I say it, but like one way to think about this is that, we're just like doing so much. Like you have so much to pay attention to. You have a lot going on. In some ways, like the anxiety and the worry is like a normal response to everything women are doing. And some researchers actually think that women have like the correct amount of anxiety, and that men could maybe be a little bit more anxious, which is like, I tell my husband a lot, like, hey, like you should be worried about this.
You're really slacking on the anxiety, bro.
I know. Yeah. But yeah, so there's a reason why you might be feeling like more anxiety than you did in the past. It's like you have more to worry about. But the maturity principle, it's not just about worrying about stuff. It's also about just like becoming who you are as an adult, and sort of people who did, date around a lot or like party all the time in college, they get married and suddenly they're like the wife guy who's like posting Instagrams like, I'm married to my best friend and the most beautiful woman in the world. That's, the maturity principle. Or so I went to college in DC. So a lot of people I went to college with now have like very, very buttoned up DC jobs where they're like basically like House of Cards level, like buttoned up kind of. And
you, when you used to put your ball sack on that guy's chin at the frat party.
Yeah, like, but it's, you know, it's because they value those jobs, that they're not crazy anymore. Like they're not crazy college kids anymore. You know, they like post videos like promoting their PR firm, and it's like, oh, it's because like you really like you matured as a person, and you know, that's a good thing for most people.
My Facebook status updates from like 15 years ago, the haunting. There should just be a horror movie just on Facebook status updates. Because like I said, I was a party girl. I drank a lot. I did a lot of party drugs, and I had this like underlying motivation of showing my mom that she couldn't control me. So I would
Yes.
just post the most ridiculous things just for all to see, because I knew she'd probably send me a message. Is this really appropriate? And then I'd like, yes, I got another one or something. But anyways, one day I'll do an episode just reading those, but it won't be flattering.
Yeah, Facebook. So I talk about Facebook status updates in the book, and yeah, so Facebook gives me those like your memories from 20 years ago or whatever. And like when I first joined Facebook, and I was like, I realized that so many of them are me like humble bragging about like each like progressive step in journalism that I got, and it's like appeared in the Huffington Post today, like no big deal. Like, but it was clearly in this like smarmy way, like where I was like performing dissatisfaction with it. And I was like, oh, is there a way to turn these off? Like, it's embarrassing.
You know, I have to see what I posted 13 years ago today. 13 years ago today, my status update was, I hate when tiny people poke me. Why? Why? Also, same day, rule number 1, never dance with a guy with a flat top. I don't know where this come. Okay, 15 years ago, I find green gummy bears to be superbly inferior to the other bears. It's a waste of 25% of my happiness.
Wow. What a strange beef to have.
These are my status updates. And usually followed along with like a mostly nude photo of some sort. Like, I don't know. Now that we got that out of the way. One thing that I think we all understand is the role of trauma and how it has seemingly permanent effects. And I'm not talking about the trauma from my Facebook status updates, but like maybe the things that happened the day before. But how does understanding this connection influence your approach to personality change?
Yeah. So the big part of the book where I deal with trauma, where I address and talk about and report on trauma, is actually openness to experiences. And this was a really kind of strange one and kind of a confusing one, because openness to experiences is not really, it doesn't mean like being not traumatized. Like it doesn't on its face appear to have anything to do with trauma. But all of those studies where they're giving people psychedelics for PTSD, the mechanism by which that happens, by which the psychedelics help with the PTSD, is that it helps with openness to experiences. It basically like increases your openness, and then like, you know, question mark, and then you become less traumatized or less scarred by your trauma. And that was like super, it's honestly still a little bit of a puzzle to me, because it's still a puzzle to the researchers who are working on it. But it's sort of like the psychedelic experience, or at least like the stuff that you witness or perceive or realize about yourself on psychedelics, helps you like see other ways of living that is not as impacted by trauma. It like helps you, it kind of like one researcher put it as like taking a helicopter ride over a mountain, and then suddenly you're like, oh, okay, this is like where I'm headed. Like you can see the whole hiking trail and the summit and everything, instead of just like focusing on like each individual rock and like all the obstacles in your path. So I found that super interesting, but like the frustrating thing about it is that psychedelics are still illegal, and there's not really like a regulated, I mean, you could do ketamine, but there's not really like a a regulated way to do them, the research is just, and I worry about the current administration and like whether that research will progress.
I got a guy in Malibu.
Yeah. I mean, everyone has a guy, but it's like to do it in a organized, way, or in a systematic way is more challenging, I think.
I remember the first time I ever did ayahuasca, it was at a time where it felt like a bad financial decision. Like this was going to cost us like $800 each or something. And we were very broke at the time. And so, but I don't remember exactly why. Like I just had this intuitive feeling. I had just started saying, I'm going to do this. And somebody had told me, when it's your time, it'll find you. And then all of a sudden 2 opportunities found me. So I was like, okay, I got to do this. And we went in with it. And afterwards, all we kept saying was that was the best thing that we could have done. It put everything into perspective. Suddenly our financial issues seemed trivial, and it ended up being that. And the changes that we made in the next couple of months, like we completely changed our situation. And so I totally understand that, like, because for me, psychedelics showed me that what I believed to be reality wasn't as solid as I thought, and how I could experience such a real, completely different reality in just a moment that I'm like, this was all just right here, like behind the veil. And so I totally understand what you mean, but it is difficult to explain to people that haven't experienced it, I suppose. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. You know how everyone talks about red flags in relationships? I think we need to flip the script. What if we spent more time looking for the green flags, the little signs that tell us, yes, this is good, this is healthy? My journey with therapy has taught me something powerful. It's not just about fixing what's broken. It's about building something beautiful. It's about learning what healthy relationships actually look like and then creating that in our own lives. And that's why I'm excited to tell you about BetterHelp. They've made therapy so convenient and accessible, serving over 5 million people worldwide. With more than 30,000 credentialed therapists, each with different specialties, you can find someone who really gets what you're working on. And what's great is everything's online, and you can easily switch therapists at no extra cost until you find your perfect match. Whether you're dating, married, building friendships, or just working on yourself, therapy can help you build relationships that truly support your growth. Discover your relationship green flags with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/mindlove today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/mindlove.
At Sierra, discover great deals on top brand workout gear, like high-quality bikes, which might lead to another discovery. Getting back on the saddle isn't always comfortable. Good news is Sierra has massage guns. And chafe wipes, too. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
Yeah. I interviewed someone for the book who had a series of horrible things happen to her that I won't get into, but she had PTSD for sure, did MDMA in a MAP study, and is like completely fine, or not. I mean, whatever. I don't know what you call someone who has recovered from PTSD, but she doesn't have PTSD anymore. And I think that's pretty amazing, but unfortunately, that sort of approval process kind of fell apart. So we're still kind of far away on that.
That makes me wonder if sometimes when people hear my story, they're like, you've been through all that and you seem fine. Maybe it's because I spent my whole 20s doing MDMA.
You cured yourself. Good job.
While creating a whole slew of other problems, but here we are.
Yeah.
You describe personality as sort of a tapestry woven from genes, partially, experiences, and choices. So when you began to understand the makings of personality in a new way, how did that help you understand your capacity for change?
I think it was honestly crucial because I was sort of raised in a family where it was like, my parents are like obsessed with genetics, and like figuring out like who gets what from who. Like, I don't know, anytime like my brother and would do something out of like that they didn't approve of, they'd be like, I don't know where you get this from, or like, I would never do that. And like the implication is that like we should be exactly like our parents, and that like anything we do that's different is just, what are you doing? Like, this isn't in your genes. And for me, just having that knowledge that your experiences and your choices can shape your personality, it was like really freeing, because who wants to be stuck with whatever hand they're dealt in life, like with the exact way that you were brought up or the exact way that your parents live. Like, most people would like to do something slightly different than exactly how they were raised. And I don't know, I think that's really cool. I think it's cool that you can change the reality that you have through choices that you make.
It's been healing having two kids, because the first one, I could feel my neuroticism a little bit more of like, I need to make you into a worthy human type thing. And it was a beautiful part. It was a beautiful journey, because there was a lot of things where I'm like, okay, I've worked on a lot, but now I'm seeing this. I don't want to pass that on. So it was like a mirror of the things I wanted to work on. But then the second one came around and had just such a wildly different personality that I realized, oh, not all of this is my doing. You guys are so different. You're just going to be who you are. And it's allowed me to just sort of step back and enjoy their personalities more than feel like I have to craft it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's absolutely true. Like, one reason why we know that personality isn't completely genetic is that siblings actually don't have very similar personalities. Which, if two people share parents and their entire upbringing, like, you would think that they would be exactly the same, right? If that were true, if people had no ability to change their personality or shape their personality. But they're not. They're honestly like often no more similar. I think one study put it as like no more similar than strangers chosen off the street. So I don't know. I think that's also really cool, because I am also a mom. And I do sometimes freak out about whether feeding him the chicken pouch or the turkey pouch will affect him one way or another, and will it mean he goes to Tufts instead of Harvard. But honestly, like, the research shows that stuff just, you can't control it. Like, you think you can, like, they're gonna kind of be who they are, and like, you can provide a safe, loving environment, and that's kind of all you can do. You can't like turn them into something.
It's liberating and a little bit scary.
Yeah, it's very scary.
You also write about how personality changes ripple through relationships. Which relationships in your life were most affected by the changes you decided to make?
I mean, I would honestly, like, to be frank, it was my relationship with my husband, because we decided to have a baby, a kind of like toward the end of this project that I was working on. Yeah, like, it was, I had been on the fence, and I finally like pulled the trigger like toward the end of this.
Oh, we kind of made that kind of decision too. I was like, I thought I would never have kids most of my life. And then when I got married, I was like, okay, I could see having kids with you. And then we're like, in 5 years. And then I don't think we would have done it if the world wouldn't have shut down. Like, I needed that nudge. And then it was just a couple months in, and I make this joke all the time, but it was dead true. We ran out of puzzles, and I'm like, what else can we do? And so we decided to have a baby, and we got pregnant that day.
Yeah. I was like, we might as well get started, because it's going to take forever. We're both old, and it happened right away. Yeah. Yeah, I was like, went into my OB like, so. Yeah.
Another thing that is interesting is how cultures view personality. What have you learned in that area? Like, because we kind of always assume like everyone's going to view it the way we do. And then it's usually when you get really deep into traveling that you realize how many differences there are in just our worldview, but how many things those things can affect. So what have you found about other cultures and the way they view personality?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the big five personality kind of framework actually like doesn't even apply in some cultures. Some cultures, like when you talk to them about openness to experiences, in particular that trait, they kind of like don't know what you're talking about. Like this, like, or it's just like not a priority in their culture, or it's just not something that people look for, is being kind of like woo, like, you know, it's just like not seen as a good thing, or it's seen as uh like a sub trait to something larger. And also some cultures have traits that they prioritize that we don't, like honesty, which is a facet of agreeableness in the Big Five. But in some, like when psychologists go and interview people from different lands, like that's like one of the first things that they say is like, this person's honest, this person's not. And that's like a big deal. But Western countries like don't kind of single it out like that.
Interesting. I wonder how many things that affects within the culture.
Right. And like what people aspire to, and like whether it's a good thing to be, you know, introverted or extroverted. I wrote a blog post about this, but there's even like different ways that different cultures define being a good friend. So I would have to look it up specifically, but it's something like they asked like Eastern Europeans, and they were like, a friend is someone that you can say anything to and they won't get mad. Which I thought, or like,
friends.
And like some countries were like, a friend is someone who would like lie to get you out of like a court case.
Who would bury the body with you?
Yeah. So people have different definitions of like what you should even aspire to as a human.
I've always been fascinated by that, though, like the meaning that we give to things, whether it's a concept like friendships or even a word. Like there's a number of words that exist in other languages that don't necessarily have a direct translation here. And because of that, we can't experience that very thing. So it would be a super fun experiment to just go around to every country and like really ask them what friendship means to them, and then just like decide to be their friend for a month and do that in like 12 different places and see which one feels the most fulfilling.
Yeah, you're like wanted in Italy because you like helped too many people bury the bodies. I don't know. Yeah, that would be interesting. Yeah, there's like I went to Portugal for this, was like one of the things I did, and they have like saudade. I'm saying it wrong, but it's like a longing for the past, that is like a important feeling for them that we don't have an exact translation for.
You're like, think about the future, man.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that a lot of people want to change at least one personality trait. I think most people that I know are like, I could improve here. But what have you learned about why some people succeed and then other people struggle?
Yeah. So for a lot of these, you have to like really want to do it. For like neuroticism in particular, like I found that I was kind of secretly clinging to my anxiety. I was like, yeah, I'll meditate, but then I'm going to like freak out about this other thing later. So you have to like really like want to do it. And one thing that I found makes a difference is if you have what psychologists call a personal project, which is just like an important thing that you're working on that the personality change will help you achieve. So in one of the chapters, I talk about people who became a lot more conscientious. And they really struggled to do that until they had something that they wanted, that the conscientiousness was necessary for. So one woman wanted to start her own business, and she found herself like not able to really kind of literally get off the couch and like get going, without like some sort of structure and framework. And so she would literally like make a calendar and like write everything down on it, and write down, keep going, like little mantras and all of her appointments and a to-do list and everything. And she would time box all her time. And that was really out of character for her. But it was because starting this business and having this like very specific life was so important. It was a project for her. And so the personality was kind of a tool to help her achieve that. And that is like one definition of personality that I heard from researchers, is that it's a tool that helps you achieve your goals. So it's not just like I like whatever turkey, I don't like chicken. It's something that helps you get what you want. So in that way, the most successful people I talked to had a goal that they were working toward.
I kind of consider myself a master of transformation. The amount of things I've changed about myself is kind of extreme. Yeah, people even ask me sometimes if I haven't seen them in a while. So what new things have you changed this time?
Yeah.
But that is probably the most important part, is I have to really map out my motivation, and not just the motivation, because the motivation is like fleeting, but how it ties to my long-term vision of myself. And there's like a lot of in between of that vision and the daily actions. And if I do not do that, I have not been able to succeed without that. But when I do that, as long as I've really mapped out that this is something that I want, I don't change my mind later, it's come to the point where it's almost inevitable. But I think that's one of the exciting parts, is people go to change something and maybe they realize just how hard it is or how much work is actually involved in it. And then they kind of lose steam. But I think it's important to understand that this process is also something that you can master. And so if there's a lot of different things you want to work toward, like, yeah, do the work for the first hard thing. The second one gets a little bit easier, and then it's a little bit easier after that because you kind of know what to expect. You remember how to learn.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so right. Yeah. I would just pick the one that will help you achieve your most important goal and go from there.
So looking back on your whole journey through personality change, what would you tell someone who just believes that they're too set in their ways to make any meaningful change?
I mean, I think that if you think that, then you probably are right. Like, it's one of those things that, like, you have to want it, right? And you have to be open to it. And it really involves like doing new things and behaving differently and thinking differently. So if you don't really want to change, then you're probably not going to all that much. So yeah, that's, I would say that, like, you know, but you might want to give it a shot, because, like, you know, if you're really set in your ways, that tells me that maybe there's a low openness to experiences there, or just something else that could be, you know, experimented with to make your life better.
Yeah, sometimes even just asking, what is in this for me? Like, what's possible if I make some sort of change? Because so often we just have our little sound bites in our head. Like you were talking about, like, I'm an introvert, or I'm set in my ways, or I am just this kind of a person. And that's the sound bite. And you close yourself off to a lot of things that you don't even know that you don't like, because you've identified with something before you see the full picture of what that means. So if you were to leave listeners with one thing to think about or do to kind of jumpstart this journey for them, what would that be?
Sign up for one thing that you don't think you can do, or that you don't feel comfortable doing. One activity that sort of feels like, I could never do this. Most people have said that that's improv for them, by the way.
I did an improv class. I loved it. So for listeners that are resonating and they want to read all of the research in your book, where's the best place to connect with you?
Yeah, so you can buy the book Me But Better wherever books are sold. And you can follow my writing at theatlantic.com, where I'm there with all the other writers. And I also have a Substack at olgahazan.substack.com.
All the links from this episode will be at mindlove.com/389. Your challenge for this week, well, I'm actually going to give you two. I'm going to give you the one Olga gave you. Pick an activity that makes you think, I could never do that. Maybe it is an improv class, a public speaking workshop. Could even be just a social meetup that feels outside your comfort zone. The goal isn't to master it. It's just to prove to yourself that your personality isn't as fixed as you think it is. Now, if you don't want to go do all that, which I highly recommend you do, I've got a second option for you. And it is to question one thing about your story. Pick one story that you've been telling yourself about your personality. Pick something that you've always said is just who you are, and then experiment with a different way of being for just one day. Notice how it feels to step outside that story, even if it's just brief. And remember, you're not erasing who you are. You're just exploring who you could be. Give it a try and let me know how it goes. You can reach out to me at mindlovemelissa on Instagram. And speaking of stories, I am so excited to share something brand new with you. I have just launched a free tool called the Story Alchemist, and it's perfect for anyone who feels like parts of their story might be holding them back. You know, those beliefs or experiences that still shape how you see yourself, even when you know deep down there might be another way to look at things. So I hand-built this AI-powered tool. That in itself is really cool. And it helps you rewrite pieces of your narrative so that you can see your story in a whole new light. So go to mindlove.com/story to try it out. It's totally free, and it's not about making things up or pretending your past didn't happen, but it is about owning your truth in a way that fuels your future. If you try it out, please do reach out to me on Instagram. I'm so excited about this one. You can also find all of my amazing sponsors at mindlove.com/sponsors. And don't forget to sign up for the Morning Mind Love at mindlove.com or text the word morning to 33777. Thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.